because of the state of where we believe the industry is, we made the decision this year at Family Reunion to not do this speech. We decided to do a different one, which, by the way, made me really popular on blog sites and with NAR and MLS and Zillow and Compass. They all called or wrote and wanted to talk to me after my remarks, which was cool, whatever. But we realized that we hadn't done this, so we need to do this. So we're now doing this thing. So in order to, a lot of people would say, man, you've got vision. And they say, how do you get vision? So it's real simple. You got to figure out where you've been and see if you can see some sort of a trend that would help you guess the future. Does that make sense? So a vision speech actually sounds more like a review of everything that has happened in the past. And that's exactly what it is. It's trying to understand and pick out the trends of the past that we might be able to use to project forward. So let's start with the numbers that drive U.S. real estate. And there's 5 numbers. The first one is home sales. So nothing new here. Home sales about 5.5 million. Now understand that in the real estate industry, that translates into 11 million sides, right? There's a buyer and a seller to each transaction. So in the real estate industry, we would say there's 11 million sales. You'll hear that said, and that's not accurate. There's 11 million sides last year. It's 5.5 million actual transactions. And nothing's changed. And why do we think nothing is changing? Well, we believe the number one culprit is the lack of inventory. This is the most amazing thing. You'll see statistics in a little while about that. But we're in a situation now, literally across the United States, where we have more demand than we have homes to sell. And the bad news about that is it drives prices up. Mm-hmm. And you're going to see the result of that in a second as well. So this is a good market. There's nothing wrong with 5.5 million. The challenge is that it's driving prices up. The demand is there. When you have 14 offers on one home somewhere in America, there's something wrong with that picture. And that means somebody's overpaying for the property, to the delight of the seller, of course, right? But there's a price to pay when you overpay over time. And we'll look at that, okay? So if you look at home sales on a monthly basis, you see that already starting the new year, we're on about the same pace. In February, we ended with an annualized rate of 5.5. So we're essentially, for the third year in a row, we're fixing to hit about the same number.
Yeah, we think for this year, we're basically going to be like on par, probably within like 1% of last year's sales based on projections right now with a couple months of data.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things Jay's going to tell you is that the sales volume is static, but the number of agents that are entering the industry is going up.
Yeah, the last 2 years, we've had essentially the same number of sides in terms of the opportunity, and we have about 150,000 more realtors competing for it. So if we're flat again this year, how many new agents will come into the market and competing for that same opportunity?
Yeah, so there's less deals per agent, right? And we'll see that stat in a second. Okay. So home prices. So the yellow line is the preferred percentage of growth over time, and that's 4%. So we would have expected that had we not had the Great Recession that occurred in real estate, 05, they claim it actually happened economically around 09, 010, something like that. We saw a departure, right, in 08. Basically, prices started going down in 07, 08, 09, 10, 11. Here we go. So we show that just to say that's the lost value in homes that can never be recaptured. That's one of the downsides of a recession like that. So then you forecast a new line, and that new line is what you see there. Okay. In other words, if you take 4% from the 247, it would show up at the same point at 2020 at 278. The value still it can't come back, right? Okay. So the average home price, median home price in America last year was $247,000. Okay. By the way, you can't sustain that. Look at this. What we want to see is at best about a 4% increase annually. Okay. When we see more than that, we start the clock ticking because you're headed towards a recession. Why? Because personal income is not growing at a 5%, 6%, 7% pace, which means that people are absolutely losing buying power in the home market. So look where we are, right? In just the last 2 years, starting this next wave, we're at 5.1. That already is unsustainable.
And we're actually seeing this number pick up this year as we go. Like we'll probably see over 6% potentially this year. And while we do see incomes picking up, like the fact that we still have that shortage of inventory means that this price growth is going to outstrip even whatever income growth we're probably having.
Well, and look at 12 to 15. This is the recovery period, right? And look what that percent was. So you take that period of 4 years at 7.6, and then you take the next period that's already at 5.1. It's outstripping. Okay. So the next thing we look at in the real estate market, right? We look at what's the volume. We look at what the prices are. And then we look at the inventory. And right now, we are clearly in a seller's market. In fact, statistically, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't December the lowest in recorded history?
Yeah, I think it might tie a level we hit like back in 13 for like a month, but like this past year on a whole was definitely one of the lowest we've had.
Yeah, well, you can look at from when we track it from 1999 all the way to 2017, and you can see that's the lowest amount. Okay, there's your culprit. That's why you're seeing those prices go up. And the only reason that we're not seeing more sales and prices come back is because of that right there. We have a lack of inventory.
The way that works, Gary, isn't it right? If we didn't put any more homes on the market, we'd have about 3.9 months of inventory if they just kept selling.
That's the way the U.S. measures it, Jay. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have about 4 months of inventory. If there were no more homes that came on the market, all homes would be bought, theoretically, and you'd be out of inventory. Mortgage rates, very important in the real estate industry. Where we averaged 4% in 2017. I want you to look at the historical average, which is what?
It's about
Go all the way back, it's over 8%.
right. And if we just look in recent history, we're looking at 6.5%.
So is 4% a good rate or a bad rate?
Historically, it's very good.
Now, we're not at 4 right now.
No, we've actually moved up to about 4.6 now, and it's not unrealistic that we could see 5% sometime around the end of this year.
What does it want to be? What does the government want it to be? For what would be considered a healthy business environment. They want to see it close to 6%, folks. And when you hear them talking about raising rates and wanting to raise rates, that's because this is important. They need those rates to come back so businesses are making a healthy profit from lending money. Okay? As a consumer, we go, no way. I always point this out, and I'll point it out to you again. I got in the real estate business in 1979. It says here interest rates were 16.6, but the truth is that we had interest rates as high as over 20% when I started selling houses. And the industry did just fine, believe it or not. So again, there it is. You can already see that trend line up. You said 4.6. We can see from when we recorded at 4.4. Most likely, we're going to hit 5%. If we don't, that means that the Fed saw something that they didn't like, and they did whatever they could do to put the brakes on that. Okay.
One of the things, Gary, we point out on this slide is if it goes up a full percent, from 4% to 5%, that rate increase is the equivalent of a 10% increase in your monthly payment if you're on a 30-year note. The math is very clear.
Yeah.
So
if your
prices are going up, interest rates are going up, that means that homes are this is another factor making them less affordable.
Yeah, so holding even on price, but if the interest rate goes from 4 to 5%, what you're saying is, let's say on a $1,000 payment, it'd now be $1,100.
That's right.
On a $2,000 payment, it would now be $2,200. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that, believe it or not, knocks people out of the housing market. And all that conspires to affordability. So the price of a piece of real estate and the amount of money they have to borrow at what rate determines how affordable the housing is.
Based on the median income, right? So the average house and the average income, average interest rate tells us this number.
Yep, based on median income. So you can see here that what this says is that right now, to afford the median priced home would take 16% of your income. Now, by the way, historically, that's a really great number. Yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
This is a good time to buy real estate in terms of affordability, folks. Do not miss that whatsoever. It's a really great time. Will we see 21 or higher? At some point, you will. In fact, if you look at the history of it, how often did you see it?
More often than not.
More often than not. Right, and that's either pricing or interest rates that causes that. Some combination of both. All right, let's look at Canada real quick. Same thing. Let's look at the 5 numbers that drives Canadian sales. So the first number to notice is home sales, the annual rate, and at 514,000 for the country, you realize that's about 10% of the size of the American market, just as a note, okay? Notice that's actually a drop, and they need it to drop. And the reason they need that number to drop is because of that number, right? Look at the average price. The average home price in Canada is $510,000. Yeah, let me remind you.
It's about twice what we are.
$247 in America. Yeah, it's more expensive. Okay, so they want that to go down, right? They want this number right here to go down. If you had taken a 4.4% trend line and going back to 1980 and coming forward, look where your home price would have been. That 4.9 since 1989 is truly unsustainable. At some point, there is a huge price to pay for that kind of appreciation because it strips people's ability to buy. Now, one of the reasons why Canadian prices have gone this high, this fast, is a lot of foreign money. So Canada, very attractive to people outside of Canada who want to dump some money into what they believe is a safe economy and in a cool place to live or have a second home. And that's what causes a lot of that. So we look at their inventory, and they measure it differently. And not to get into a full explanation of that, but if you notice at 59%, they are right at the cusp of a seller's market, and they're right at the height of a balanced market. Okay.
And that directionally, it's moving farther into the balanced market, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah.
Right. So in recent months, we've actually seen this start to come down, and it's interesting because a lot of it's actually being directed by regulation in Canada. They've actually recognized that they have an affordability issue, and various provinces are now passing laws to deal directly with that.
Yeah, so even though there's a 4.8% mortgage rate, you don't qualify in Canada today at 4.8%. They choose a higher rate to stress test you because their mortgages are not 30-year fixed. You can't get a 30-year fixed in Canada. So you would get a 5-year mortgage, and then it would turn into an annually adjusted rate. So, yeah, the interesting thing is they don't have foreclosures because people understand they have to buy what they could afford. If should rates go up and fluctuate, they buy less than they could actually afford today, right? When we went on the tour with the book Shift, and we got into Canada, we had to take the whole chapter on foreclosures out because they didn't know what it was.
Yeah. What's a short sale? Good for them.
Yeah. So if you thought about it in those terms, and you think about the wretched nature of short selling and foreclosures, and you realize that the American system of full onslaught, freedom and free enterprise, you see the result of that is lots of foreclosure and a lot of people losing a lot. Canada might have it a little better, right? So you look at this with their interest rates rising and with their prices rising, affordability's dropped by 3.7% between 2016 and 2017 on single family and 4.7% on condos.
And it's more than 10% off of the annual trend. They're 11% less affordable than it would be on average. So year over year is one thing, but they've been kind of getting less and less affordable.
They've been on a trend of becoming less and less affordable.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. All right, so let's look at the U.S. economy. Let's take a look at 4 quick things. So the first is GDP. So What do they want GDP to be? What does the government want GDP to be?
Right now, I think they're shooting for somewhere in the 3% range would be like on track with their long-term projections.
If they can get there. How often have we been there since 2000?
Yeah, we've been averaging right around 2% basically since we recovered from the last recession, and we've kind of been stuck in that rut. They think we may hit 3% this year, but probably 2.5% is realistic.
Yeah, it's a target. You have to ever, and by the way, remember, what was driving, when you see the 3.8s and the 4.5s and the 4.7s, what era were you in?
Bubble.
Huh? Yeah.
Both of those were bubbles.
Yeah. But what I'm pointing out to you is that you were bringing in a truly new product that was getting established in the world, particularly in America. And we were a leader in that. So
it was a whole new industry. That's what you're talking about. You're going all the way back to the 90s. That was a whole new industry got introduced.
That's what I'm trying to tell you. I'm saying a whole new industry. So when you think about what does it take to sustain a 3% or higher, what's the answer? Have to have a whole new industry. And do we have one in America? Say no. Okay, there you go. So when our president stands up and says, we're going to get 3%, that we should always be at 3%, you go, okay, fair enough. What new industry are you going to back or support? Remember, the government got way behind the internet, right? Allowing them not to pay sales tax on any sales, right? You remember that? Sure. Yeah. I mean, just think about that. The corner business, if you bought something from them, they had to pay the sales tax. But if you got online and bought it, you didn't have to pay a sales tax. And they did that in order to support this new industry coming into the world. So it always surprises me when you read the news and they talk about they want growth in the economy, and the government knows that in order for that to really happen at a 3% or higher level, what do they have to do? They have to pick an industry and support it. And the biggest problem with that today is that would be clean energy, solar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That would be windmills, that would be battery storage. And what industry is completely against that? Your other big industry, energy. That doesn't make them happy overall. Okay? As a result, you have a government that's conflicted. So unemployment, how much lower can you go? The challenge that we have with this type of unemployment is that it's not necessarily embedded in where the skilled jobs are. So what we end up having is the haves and the have-nots. The individuals that have the high skills getting paid at one end of the spectrum, and individuals that don't have those skills and they're getting paid at the other end. Okay? So we're employing more people, but one of our challenges is, are they earning more money? And that's the bigger issue. Okay? And the answer is sort of, right? No, now this is big. For individuals and households, I think households are around 59,000 average.
That's
individuals
right.
about 31. Is that right?
Right.
So and that's the highest that's ever been recorded. So on one hand, you go, okay, wow, this is the best ever recorded. But the problem is when you see home prices, just as an example, going up by 5%, 7% annually, that outstrips the income gains. So those individuals are getting left behind. Yeah.
The cost of goods we know should be going up about 2% for inflation, but then we have things like college debt, healthcare cost. Those we know have been going up at a very fast pace,
and
which means that sense of people might have their all-time high income historically, but it doesn't feel like it.
Well, and we just named the three big expenses in a life: the house, the sending a kid to college, and your healthcare. And those have far outstripped inflation. That's the challenge, right? All right, inflation, totally in check. Totally in check at this point. Understand the government wants inflation, so if it started seeing it being very anemic, then it would do what it could do to get it back up, right? Because we want inflation. Because if the price of goods goes up, then the ability to make more money and pay better theoretically occurs. So we want it to go up, okay? And the target there is 2%. So think of a GDP as like 3% and think of inflation as 2%. Think of unemployment as anything below 5%. And you begin to get a real sense. Now, if you know these things, you can literally just pay attention to the news and they'll tell you the percent and you'll go, okay, that's either good or bad. I now know. Okay. So that's kind of how you track it. All right, let's look at the Canadian economy. Same three things. First is GDP. By the way, good. By the way, that's probably real estate and oil and gas.
Yep.
Okay, that's driving that. I think real estate is the number one contributor to GDP in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Oil and gas is number two. Okay, and when those two are both rocking and rolling, GDP is solid in Canada. Right? Unemployment, they measure it differently. So when you see a 6.4% in Canada, please realize that that's very comparable to our percents in the 4%. Okay. Notice that they're also very much off of their average, right? Which is good. Inflation, well, they've got deflation going on right now, and that's really weird. But they're causing that in housing because they're trying to knock those prices down, right? And that's what's getting measured. If I'm not mistaken, that's what's driving that.
Right. We've seen a little bit of a downtick. Also, like oil prices last year were a little bit lower. They started to come back up. So I suspect this year their targets are going to move a little bit closer to 2% again.
Yep. All right. So let's look at the U.S. Any questions? Just take a break here and breathe. Any questions on any of this? By the way, if you're operating a business, this is all good news. If you're a business owner in Canada or America, everything we just told you is good news. Okay? This is a great climate to be in business.